Good evening and welcome to this Decision 8 2018 Attorney General debate. I'm political reporter Max Reese, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. First, let me introduce you to our candidates. Republican Sue Hatfield, a state prosecutor from Pomfret, and Democrat Representative William Tong, an attorney from Stamford. The rules for the evening are simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute for opening and closing statements and 2 minutes to answer each question. They will also have the opportunity to respond to comments made about them by the other candidate. We will let some conversations flow, but we also want to make sure we get to as many topics as we possibly can during this 1 hour debate. And with that, Ms. Hatfield, your opening statement.
Thank you. And first off, I want to thank Max Reese as well as NBC Connecticut for having me speak with you tonight. My name is Sue Hatfield, and I am honored to be the Republican and Independent Party nominee for Attorney General. Since 2005, I've served the state of Connecticut as a prosecutor, making our communities safer, standing up to our most vulnerable members of society, our elderly and our children. In fact, I was the first prosecutor to receive a conviction for the completed crime of human trafficking. My opponent, he's been in lockstep with Dan Malloy, raising taxes to record levels, releasing violent criminals from prison early, where they go on to commit heinous crimes. Standing silent with respect to Dan Malloy's destructive policies. The choice is clear. I will let the law be my guide. Thank you.
Representative Tong, your opening statement.
Thank you, Max. Great to be with you, Ms. Hatfield. Like a lot of Connecticut families, I feel like, and my family feels like, we have a target on our back. Like the President of the United States is coming after us. The Attorney General's first job is protect the families of Connecticut. And that's what I've done for 12 years, passing some of the strongest gun laws in the nation, standing up to the big banks to help thousands of Connecticut families stay in their homes, writing tough new laws to prevent child abuse in schools. That's what I'll continue to do as your Attorney General. Ms. Hatfield is right. The choice is very clear. It's stark. Ms. Hatfield is a strong Trump supporter. And when she was asked, do you support the president's policy of separating children from their families? She said, yes, I do. That's not a policy we could ever support here in Connecticut. The question for you tonight, and the question for both of us, is when Donald Trump attacks Connecticut families, will you stand with Trump or will you stand with Connecticut? I'll stand with Connecticut every single time.
Our first question will go to Ms. Hatfield, and you will, of course, have a chance to answer, Representative Tong. On both of your campaign websites, you both give lists of critical issues you each want to address, like consumer privacy, opioids, net neutrality, among many others. What is going to be your approach to actually dealing with these issues? Could we expect to see you as Attorney General in the headlines all the time? Would you litigate? Would you open investigations? Ms. Hatfield?
Well, I believe that Attorney General Jepsen has done an excellent job. He came from a political background, and he kept that at the courthouse door. So I will be much like Attorney General Jepsen in how I approach this office. I believe that this office should be focused on Connecticut, and the law should be our guide, not politics. I will not make this a political office, much like Richard Blumenthal did. So I believe that Attorney General Jepsen has done an excellent job in bringing this office back where its focus is Connecticut.
Representative Tong?
When Ms. Hatfield says she doesn't want to talk about politics, it means she doesn't want to talk about her ardent support for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is leading an unprecedented attack on our way of life here in Connecticut, and that's entirely about Connecticut. For example, thousands of Connecticut families depend on the Affordable Care Act here in Connecticut, and they depend on coverage for pre-existing conditions. There are 18 Republican attorneys general in Texas right now seeking to get the Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional. I can only presume, based on her strong support for Donald Trump, that Ms. Hatfield would join her Republican colleagues in seeking to overturn the Affordable Care Act and reverse health care coverage for thousands of Connecticut families. Donald Trump's attack on the environment, on clean air, on clean water, on Connecticut taxpayers. Donald Trump is giving us the largest tax increase, potentially, in state history. We lose $10.3 billion in deductions under the Trump tax law, more than $2.8 billion in new tax liability for the people of this state. The people of the state can't bear that, and this is at the hand of this president. So when Ms. Hatfield says she doesn't want to talk about politics, she doesn't want to talk about Donald Trump because of the attack that Donald Trump is leading on Connecticut's families.
I'll give you about 20, 30 seconds here, but how would you handle the office of Attorney General? Would we see you opening investigations, joining with attorneys general in other states? How would you handle the office if you become?
So I come to this office with similar experience to Dick Blumenthal and George Jepson, and also much more extensive experience. I've spent much more time in private practice as a civil litigator, almost 20 years doing major civil litigation, big cases. I've also been the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, so I think I have deeper experience in the legislature and working with the governor and the legislature and standing up to the President of the United States. So in many ways, I feel much more prepared to do the whole job of being Attorney General than many of my predecessors with respect to Dick and George.
Ms. Hatfield, do you care to respond?
I would. It's no surprise that Mr. Tong doesn't want to talk about his record. He's raised taxes to a record level, and he makes broad assumptions. I'm a registered nurse. Healthcare is a priority for me, and I'll bring a compassionate voice to the Office of Attorney General. I support people being covered with pre-existing illnesses. So to say that I am a Republican, I will do what is in lockstep with the Republicans, I will do what is in the best interest of the people of Connecticut every time. I will let the law be my guide and not politics.
I'm going to move on to a specific.
May I respond to that?
I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Sure. Ms. Hatfield says that she'll be compassionate, but she supports the president's policy of separating children from their families, ripping children away from their parents at the border. We just lost an 18-month-old in detention. A toddler died at the border because of Donald Trump's policies. Sue Hatfield hasn't talked about her support or not for the Affordable Care Act. I can only presume that she's against the Affordable Care Act. It's not compassionate to support separating children from their families, and it's not compassionate to take away health insurance coverage from families in Connecticut.
Ms. Hatfield, I'll allow you to respond. 30 seconds.
Thank you. The separation of children. As a prosecutor, as a mom, we have a duty to protect those children coming across the border. And if Mr. Tong had listened to the complete dialogue on the media interview that he's talking about, he would have seen that. It was not just a simple cut and paste of a clip, but that's the reason why I supported that, is for the children and the need to protect the children. I prosecute and protect children every day, and that's the focus. I am a compassionate prosecutor.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another topic. We're going to move on to another topic. We're going to talk about the issue of guns now. This topic is for you, Representative Tong. Today marks the one-year anniversary of the mass shooting in Las Vegas, and it coincides with Connecticut's ban on bump stocks going into effect. For our viewers at home, for those who you may not know, a bump stock is an accessory to a firearm that could make a gun fire more rapidly, for those who are watching at home. So to Representative Tong, you were, of course, in the General Assembly when this passed. Do you agree with this specific reform, and should Connecticut go further when it comes to gun control?
Yes, I wrote it. I wrote the ban on bump stocks. I also wrote the bill this year to ban ghost guns and 3D printed guns, which my opponent opposed. I'm very proud of the work we've done in the General Assembly over the past 12 years. I've been 4 years as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and our state's gun laws are my personal responsibility. The most important work I've ever done in life, really professionally, is passing the domestic violence gun law of 2015 after the death of Lori Jackson, after she was shot by her husband, and her mother, Mary Jackson, was shot 4 times in the face. From the bump stock ban to the ghost gun ban to the Sandy Hook reforms to the domestic violence gun law, we have a moral obligation here in Connecticut to have the strongest gun laws in the nation, because we have the worst kind of relationship with gun violence after the loss of 26 souls in Newtown. My opponent accepted the endorsement of the Connecticut Citizens Defense League, which is the local wing of the National Rifle Association. Now, I grant you, they later recanted when she entered the general election, but in order to get their endorsement, in order to get the NRA's endorsement, you have to pledge loyalty to what they want. And what they want is to repeal the strongest gun laws in the nation. They want to repeal the Sandy Hook reforms. They want to repeal the domestic violence gun law. They want to repeal the bump stock ban. And I think what's really important is Bob Stefanowski has been asked to release his questionnaire that he filled out for the CCDL. I think Sue Hatfield should do the same, because this is just too important to the people of the state. We have lost too much in lives. And the best way to honor the people that we've lost is to have the strongest gun laws in the nation.
Ms. Hatfield, question about gun control to you.
Thank you. Just to clarify a few items is first, I did not ever submit a questionnaire to either CCDL or the NRA. And secondly, I took a position against 3D plastic undetectable guns before the primary. They had endorsed me and then they unendorsed me. I believe I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. However, there is a line that needs to be drawn in the sand. As the next Attorney General, my role would be to enforce the laws in Connecticut, not create new ones. As a registered nurse who's practiced nearly 10 years at Yale New Haven Hospital in mental health, I believe that mental health plays a critical role in violence, with gun violence and with school violence. So that's how I approach gun control. It's a common sense approach. And we need to talk more about mental health in our society.
I'll ask a follow-up to you, and I'll give you the same opportunity. What do you think the message has been to lawful gun owners in the state, where it seems, at least year after year, starting in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, how do you feel that they have been treated by the General Assembly when it comes to some of these gun laws, Ms. Hatfield?
Well, I believe that lawful gun owners are just that. They're lawful gun owners. And one of the issues in Connecticut has been we place these laws on the books, but then we don't enforce them. Most recently, a few months back, Brian Oler brought to the General Assembly's attention that there was nearly 20,000 guns that were not entered into the registry. This places the law-abiding citizens at risk for being stopped, for being detained. It also places law enforcement at risk for if they're responding to a call and they are not aware that there is a gun in the house, that places them at risk. My husband's a recently retired state trooper. I support our law enforcement 110%. If we have a law that's on the books, we need to enforce it.
Representative Tong, same question to you.
We all know that Donald Trump has sold out Connecticut's families to the NRA, and Sue Hatfield knew that when she supported Donald Trump in 2016 as a delegate, made hundreds of phone calls for Donald Trump, distributed hundreds of lawn signs. And let's listen carefully to what Ms. Hatfield said. She doesn't believe that we should create new laws. That means she doesn't believe in a ban on ghost guns, unregistered, unserialized guns. She doesn't believe in banning 3D printed guns, even though she says that she does. She wouldn't pass new laws. She doesn't believe in requiring gun owners to show their gun permits to law enforcement, police officers. She doesn't believe in safe storage. I believe that people in Connecticut think these are common sense measures. Most people assume that if a police officer asks you to see your permit if you're openly carrying in a Starbucks, that you have to show it. But that's not the law. That's not the law because her running mate, Joe Markley, works hard to kill these bills every year in the General Assembly.
Ms. Hatfield,
if I may.
I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm running for Attorney General. I'm not quite sure what Attorney Tong is running for, whether it's Congress or Senate, but the Attorney General for Connecticut doesn't make laws. The Attorney General follows laws. And my husband's still in law enforcement, and I do believe that if law enforcement asks to see a permit, they should show it. I also believe that we need common sense approach, and we need to talk more about mental health.
This is a critical issue for the people of this state, and I've talked about this in the primary, and I'll talk about it now. The Attorney General's job is not just to practice the law. The Attorney General's job is to change it. You know, you're not just hiring a lawyer, you're hiring a leader of a major state agency of 200 lawyers, investigators, and staff, and sometimes the courtroom doesn't provide an answer. If a Republican-controlled Congress forces us to accept gun permits from Virginia and North Carolina and Texas, you better believe that I'll take to the courtroom and to the legislature to stop it and protect Connecticut's families.
I think we're going to move on, if that's where we're going to go to the next topic of the opioid crisis here in the state of Connecticut. This question is for you, Ms. Hatfield. What would be the first thing you do to address the opioid crisis in Connecticut? And as you get further into the office, would you consider subpoenaing records or having subpoenas issued to get records from pharmaceutical companies?
I will plan on continuing Attorney General Jepsen's investigation into the pharmaceutical companies. And yes, I believe that questions need to be answered. I would issue subpoenas to get to the root of what the pharmaceuticals marketing practices were. Were there any arrangements between healthcare providers and the pharmaceutical companies to really market these medications? Were there safer medications that they could have put forward? So I believe I will continue the investigation. I will continue to draw on my experience as a mental health nurse where I worked with individuals with addiction. I've handled cases where defendants came through the courthouse doors due to addiction. So I believe I am the best qualified candidate to deal with this issue due to my healthcare and law enforcement background.
Representative Tong on opioids?
So this issue is so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than the Attorney General's investigation into the opioid crisis. And I would expand what Attorney General Jepsen is doing already, not just to investigate the big pharmaceutical companies, but also the distributors, the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, major pharmacy chains, treatment centers, healthcare providers, because I believe there is an addiction industry that makes money off of fueling people's addiction. You've got to go beyond what's happening right now. Also, the Attorney General's leadership right now on the generic drug manufacturers' price fixing case also is really important to the opioid crisis because it drives up the price of effective treatment and forces people into the illicit marketplace, and they may self-medicate if they can't get the drugs they need. Also, this is a critical example of where the Attorney General has to go beyond the courtroom and into the legislature and not just practice the law, but to change it. We've done that at the state level. I've been on the front lines of increasing the availability of Narcan, of strengthening penalties for dealing fentanyl, so prosecutors like Ms. Hatfield can prosecute drug dealers. And I've also helped to limit the amount of time that you can have a prescription for opioids here in Connecticut to 7 days. That's important, having a real record on these issues. We have to be specific. We have to really have an action plan on opioids and not talk in vague generalities and expressions of concern.
To follow up with you, the Malloy administration welcomed a partnership with, I believe it was Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals, to help with disposing of opioids and heroin. That came almost on the heels of Mallinckrodt dealing with a settlement in the state of Florida, dealing with those one-stop shop pain centers, if you will.
Yeah.
What do you make of a partnership like that with where Mallinckrodt did not admit any fault, but is trying to make good on something when many people were harmed?
So this is a big feature of large-scale civil litigation. Cases like the tobacco case, the National Mortgage Servicer settlement, the settlement with the rating agencies. Often you get a settlement agreement or a consent decree that doesn't just contain a large payment of money to Connecticut, but also specific actions designed to remedy the misconduct. Right. And so Big Tobacco, for example, was supposed to do all that it could to deter smoking by kids. We're going to see another phase of that battle where we need to take on Big Tobacco in how they push out vaping and Juul and products like that to our young people. So I think it's important as Attorney General to push these companies, if necessary, to investigate and sue these companies. And if you get to a point where you engage in a settlement, to force them to take action of the kind that you described to remedy the misconduct they're responsible for.
Ms. Hatfield, I'll let you respond as well. A company comes to the state and says, we want to try to make this harder for people to overdose, something like that, but they may have had a part in that. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to those companies, and how do you handle that?
Well, first off, I'm going to address what Mr. Tong had stated about Donald Trump. And I believe that we need a bipartisan approach to this, where the administration is going to be giving Connecticut $22 million to fight the opioid crisis. And I believe I'm the best person for the job to have a fair and even-handed approach and not just cut off any help from the administration just because it's a political battle. We need a fair and even-handed Attorney General that can reach across the aisle, that can work with the administration in the best interest for the people of Connecticut, and that is what I will do.
I think we're going to move on to the next topic. This is for Representative Tong. Over the past year, the issue of sexual assault has become one of the most visible around the country, but also politically charged topics on both politics and in Hollywood. Does Connecticut's Attorney General have a role in ensuring that victims of sexual assault can seek justice? Representative Tong.
Yes, the Attorney General has a huge role to play. Let me be very clear. I believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and I called on Judge Kavanaugh to step aside and withdraw as a nominee for the Supreme Court this week. I think it's incredibly important for the Attorney General to provide legal leadership, policy leadership, legislative leadership, and also moral leadership. And calling on Judge Kavanaugh to step away is an important step for all of us because the allegations are just too numerous and they're too severe. And to hear about a potential Supreme Court justice who may have put his hand over the mouth of a young woman and pinned her down, and then to hear almost every other day we hear new allegations and new corroboration for those allegations. I think it's really important to be clear about this. My opponent, to this day, to this minute, I don't think has spoken on this issue. And her running mate, Bob Stefanowski, said, "I'm going to take a pass." You can't take a pass on sexual assault. You can't take a pass on one of the most important issues facing millions of Connecticut women right now. And this has been a real focus of my work in the General Assembly. As you know, as I said earlier, I wrote the domestic violence gun law to help protect largely women from their abusers and potentially getting shot by their abusers. I wrote the dual arrest law this year, which will seek to prohibit both people in a domestic violence incident from getting arrested. I've focused on the sexual assault bill before the Judiciary Committee, which passed the Judiciary Committee, and I was proud to introduce it, which extended the statute of limitations, actually lifted the statute of limitations for sexual assault. It was called the Time's Up bill. And the reason why we don't have that law, the reason why we don't have a uniform process for sexual harassment, sexual assault reporting is because Joe Markley, Ms. Hatfield's running mate, did everything he could to kill that bill in the General Assembly.
How would you handle issues of sexual assault, but as the state's representative Attorney General, what role do you think you play in that regard, Ms. Hatfield?
Yeah, so recently I did issue a press release as to the reporting that every state agency should have unified reporting. It should be front and center on the state website. With respect to what's going on in D.C., this is why this office, the Attorney General, why I will follow the law as opposed to letting politics dictate my decision. My heart broke for Dr. Ford. Also, with Judge Kavanaugh, his family will never be the same. It's really, truly a devastating moment for our country. And as the next Attorney General, this is going to be one of my focuses will be sex harassment, sex discrimination, and discrimination in general. And as a state employee, I fought back. I'm a woman. I know what the women go through on a daily basis. And I filed action against the state of Connecticut due to illegal discrimination. So this issue will be front and center. The women of Connecticut, the men of Connecticut, I will not tolerate any illegal discrimination, any harassment or sex assault, point blank.
If I may follow up, you said this issue will be front and center, the issue of sexual
Absolutely.
assault. Do you think it's top of mind for as many voters in Connecticut? And how do you feel about Judge Kavanaugh possibly sitting on the Supreme Court?
Well, I believe in the presumption of innocence. I'm a prosecutor, and when defendants come through the courthouse doors, I never say this person is guilty because they're coming to court. I follow the law, and I let the law be my guide, not politics. I'm all in favor of the investigation. I want to hear more about what the investigation turns up. But as a prosecutor, I believe in the presumption of innocence. He is very qualified, his qualifications. He is very qualified. But I believe more investigation is going to be done, so it's too early to say what I believe should happen in this matter.
Representative Tong, 1 minute to you.
Max, Sue Hatfield just articulated Donald Trump's position right now on Judge Kavanaugh. I was disgusted, like a lot of people across the country, to watch the Republican men of the U.S. Senate put victims on trial this week on televisions across the globe. Dr. Ford was eminently credible and believable. Judge Kavanaugh instead came in and said he was being attacked by the Clintons in testimony that I must say was not appropriate for a justice of the Supreme Court, and I wonder if he has the temperament. You know that I work on those issues at the state level with the state Supreme Court and our judicial nominees. Also, listen carefully. Ms. Hatfield said that she issued a press release this week. That's the first time I've heard from Ms. Hatfield on this issue. Actually, she was asked by Paul Bass in the New Haven Independent whether she thinks sexual assault is her responsibility as Attorney General, and she said clearly it's not relevant.
I'll give you the last word on this issue, Ms. Hatfield.
I don't ever recall being asked that by Paul Bass, and I believe it's highly relevant that this should be, the women, the men should be free of harassment, of assault in the workplace. And as an Attorney General, I believe in the presumption of innocence. That's what makes our country great. I believe that Dr. Ford, her life will never be the same. Neither will Judge Kavanaugh. It's too early to tell. Just like I'm a prosecutor, I listen to all of the facts. I ascertain the evidence before making a decision. Because somebody comes through the courthouse door, because somebody makes an allegation, that is not deemed fact 100% unless it's proven.
Give you 10.
Ms.
We're
Hatfield
going to move on. We're going to
right.
move on. We had a. I think we fleshed out that topic pretty well. Going to question about experience for you specifically, Ms. Hatfield. As a prosecutor, what is it, do you think, that provides you the tools and the experience to run an office that has several dozen, almost a couple hundred attorneys in it, but also to provide legislative counsel? Because so often the Attorney General gets asked to opine on varying topics. So what is it that prepares you to provide that kind of role as Attorney General?
Well, I've been a prosecutor since 2005. I have been in court day after day. I have solid litigation experience in court, have tried cases to verdict before judge and jury. So I do have the strongest legal litigation background in this field here. I used to work also for the Speaker of the House in Washington, D.C. I bring the experience on the legislative front. However, that's not the complete focus of this job. It is to be the lawyer of the state. If I wanted to make new laws, I would run for state rep. I would run for state senate. I would perhaps run for president, as sometimes I think Mr. Tong is. But that's my background. I have a strong litigation background. I also have a legislative policy background, working as a policy aide to the Speaker of the House. I also have big law firm experience, where I was a municipal finance lawyer at Hawkins, Delafield and Wood, worked on significant, complex cases. One was a near $1 billion nuclear power plant sale. So I have a comprehensive legal background to bring to this position.
Representative Tong, and if I can add one piece to your question, you say in your campaign ads, you passed XYZ,
Yes.
you passed this. Do you think that's a fair characterization of your role in judiciary? Because it's committees that passes the legislation, and it's the General Assembly that passes legislation. In some cases, you're carrying a bill for Governor Dan Malloy. So if you can hit on that as well in the same question about experience.
Sure. I mean, when I say I passed it, I mean, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I was responsible for writing it and handling the debate on the floor of the House and getting the votes for those bills. So when we talk about the domestic violence gun law, I wrote it. And I argued that case before the people of this state on the floor of the House of Representatives. And so if you're asking whether that credit is due to the work that I've done, I believe that it is. But let's talk about, your first question here. I have great respect for Ms. Hatfield's experience and her service to the state as a prosecutor. That's just not what the Attorney General does. Ms. Hatfield works for the Chief State's Attorney, and the Chief State's Attorney has exclusive authority for criminal matters in the state. The Attorney General does a little bit with home improvement contractors. I'm the only candidate in this race who has almost 20 years of experience in major civil litigation, first at a big firm in New York City, and now at one of the most well-respected firms here in Connecticut. And so I'm most well prepared to do tomorrow what the Attorney General does against Volkswagen, against the major rating agencies, against the big banks, against big pharma. I also think it's important to note that the Attorney General does so much more than that. The Attorney General issues advisory opinions. The Attorney General works with the Department of Children and Families and does child support enforcement and defends claims against the state. The Attorney General, in order to represent the state, has to know every nook and cranny of of state government. And in order to do that, you have to have deep experience in state government. I have that as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I've worked with the Attorney General on the core functions of his job. I just don't think that my opponent's experience as a prosecutor is germane to the job of being Attorney General.
Would you like to respond 1 minute, Ms. Hatfield?
Yes, thank you. But I do believe that having extensive experience in court, handling trials before judge and jury is vital. And that's what was determined in the Bisowitz decision, that there needs to be some level of litigation in court. I bring that to the table. And many of these battles are going to be fought in courtrooms. And I, managing a law firm of 200 attorneys as the largest law firm in the state, have the experience to. I've led complex investigations, multi-jurisdictional cases all over the state of Connecticut. So I do bring experience that's vital to the Office of Attorney General. Also, my bond experience. I was a public finance lawyer, and I have experience in municipal bonding. It's vital because the Attorney General will have a vote on that bond commission. And just last week, where hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on Malloy's pork projects, from a municipal finance background, I will be able to root out waste and fraud, and that experience will be vital to bring to the table.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, let me
Tong.
say that Ms. Hatfield's right. The Bisowitz decision says that you need to have some litigation experience that you do for a living for clients. I don't just have some litigation experience. I have tons of litigation experience. State and federal court in Connecticut, dozens of cases in other courts across the country, hundreds of matters for hundreds of clients. And this is the key. In civil litigation, this is exactly what the Attorney General does. Big, large-scale civil litigation. I did it in New York. I did it in Connecticut. Ms. Hatfield is a prosecutor. That's great experience to be the Chief State's Attorney, but not to be the Attorney General.
Next question is to you, Representative Tong. This is your third go at a higher office, if you will. You ran for the U.S. Senate a number of years ago. You ran for mayor of your home city of Stamford. What should voters make of your attempts at higher office, and why do you think now is a better fit in Attorney General, perhaps, than those other two unsuccessful bids?
I think what people should take away is the perseverance that I learned from my parents. They say that politics is all about how you get up off the canvas, and I've been knocked down a time or two. No one who looks like me and has my last name No Asian American had ever been elected to the state level in Connecticut's history before I was elected in 2006. No constitutional officer has ever looked like me or had a last name like mine. It's not easy. It's not easy being first. It's not easy to get there when nobody else has done it. I'm the first Democrat ever to hold my seat in its history. And so it's taken a few attempts to make a bigger impact. And I'm proud that my parents taught me to persevere, to work hard, and if you try something and it doesn't work, you try again. You get up and you dust yourself off and you try again. And that's what my immigrant parents taught me. And this job, as I said earlier, I come to this job with due respect to George Jepson and Dick Blumenthal in many ways, and I think they'd agree. I come to this job even more qualified than they were, even more prepared to do this job because of my extensive civil litigation experience, because I've been in the private sector much longer than George and Senator Blumenthal, and much longer than my opponent, because I've been chairman of the Judiciary Committee, because I wrote the domestic violence gun law and helped thousands of Connecticut families stay in their homes. I'm ready to do the whole job of being Attorney General, not just the courtroom job, but the policy job, the legislative job, and as I said earlier, speaking clearly about the moral issues of our day, like separating children from their families. People need to know where the Attorney General is on that. It's clear where I am, and it's clear where Ms. Hatfield is.
I'll turn the question around a little bit for you, Ms. Hatfield. This is your first run at statewide office, and you come from a part of the state that, frankly, the statewide level hasn't seen a ton of representation in the past. So what do you say to that?
Well, being from Eastern Connecticut, I'm the only candidate from either side of the aisle for any statewide position from Eastern Connecticut. So people in Eastern Connecticut want to be represented. Time and time again, they see the statewide candidates from a different part of the state. So I will be a strong advocate for the people of Eastern Connecticut and issues especially like crumbling foundations, where it took over 540 complaints to finally get the ear of the legislators and people in Hartford. So I do bring a strong voice, and I believe this position is too important to be dictated by politics. I am a prosecutor. I will bring the same level of respect for the law to this job. We need an attorney general who will follow the law and not do what is in the political interest, whether you're running this year for Senate or next year for Congress. I'm running for Attorney General because I believe I'm the best person to follow the law and not let politics be my guide.
We're going to move on to the next question.
Eastern Connecticut's tremendously important.
We're going to move on to the next question. Ms. Hatfield, we're going to start this question, you'll get a similar one, about the issue of Donald Trump in this election. Hillary Clinton, of course, won this state by a wide margin, but almost 700,000 people in the state of Connecticut did, in fact, vote for Donald Trump. So you were a delegate for the now president at the Republican National Convention. So how do you represent those people who voted for Donald Trump in the state, but also what do you think the concerns are of people in the state of Connecticut when it comes to the administration in Washington?
Well, it's no wonder why Attorney Tong wants to talk about Donald Trump, because he wants to run from his record of raising taxes to a record high and releasing violent criminals from jail, and which resulted in a triple murder in my hometown of Griswold. The Lindquist family will never be the same. So I will do what is in the best interest for the people of Connecticut. My focus is Connecticut. It's not Washington. I'm not running for president. And there will be issues that we need to work with the administration on, such as the opioid crisis, such as crumbling foundations, such as privacy with Google and Facebook. And there's going to be issues that we need to push back on the administration. So the people of Connecticut should have an attorney general that's fair and even-handed. And it doesn't surprise me that Mr. Tong wants to constantly talk about Donald Trump as opposed to his record.
Representative Tong?
Ms. Hatfield mentioned how important Eastern Connecticut is, and I completely agree with that. And the paper of record out there, one of the papers of record, the New London Day, Ms. Hatfield's hometown newspaper, called her a genuine Trump sycophant this week in the Sunday edition because of her ardent support for Donald Trump. I think what Ms. Hatfield is missing is that Donald Trump's attack on Connecticut families is entirely about Connecticut and all of us, his attack on immigrants across Connecticut. You know why I talk about Donald Trump? Because he's coming after people like my parents. Because Donald Trump has formed a task force to denaturalize immigrant American citizens like Addie and Nancy Tong sitting at home right now in Glastonbury, Connecticut. That's just morally indefensible. And this affects families across Connecticut every day. And we talk about the Affordable Care Act. That's not a national issue. That affects Connecticut families who have pre-existing conditions and depend on the Affordable Care Act. That's not a mandate. That's not a policy. That's life. We're talking about Donald Trump's attack on the environment, on clean air, clean water. He wants to make coal great again. And that means he's letting Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia shoot emissions into the air, and they blow downwind into Connecticut. And he's attacking Connecticut taxpayers with this tax law that eliminates $10.3 billion in deductions. This is the largest tax increase in state history on Connecticut residents, and it's coming at the hand of Donald Trump and Sue Hatfield.
1 minute response from Ms. Hatfield.
The attack on Connecticut taxpayers came from you. You voted for the two largest tax increases in Connecticut's history. That came from you. You are a legislator. You had that vote. You had the power to stop that. Now, with respect to the state and local tax issue, I will support the initiative of Attorney General Jepsen with the state and local tax, because I believe that's in the best interest for the taxpayers of Connecticut.
The Connecticut Mirror today just said that what was just said here by Ms. Hatfield is fake news. The two largest tax increases did not come under Dan Malloy. The Connecticut Mirror said that today. Lowell Weicker was responsible for one of the largest tax increases in state history. She didn't address the fact that Donald Trump is now responsible today for the largest tax increase in state history on Connecticut residents. I know she wants to talk about Dan Malloy. Dan Malloy is done in a couple of months. Dan Malloy is not the biggest risk facing people in this state. The biggest risk facing people in this state is Donald Trump and his attack on Connecticut families.
We're going to move on to the next topic, the issue of crumbling foundations. Yeah. This has been alluded to during this conversation. This is we're going to start with Representative Tong on this issue. NBC Connecticut first broke the stories about crumbling foundations in eastern Connecticut, and Governor Dan Malloy's requests for help from FEMA have been denied by both President Barack Obama and President Donald Trump's FEMA administrators. Knowing that that is the current feeling in Washington, how does an Attorney General Tong change that sentiment and handle the issue moving forward?
So here's a great example, and I'm going to jump on this issue the very first week. I was just visiting with one of the leaders of the advocates for crumbling foundations homeowners in eastern Connecticut. And I said to him, we'd meet the very first week to focus on specifics. This is an area in which we don't need to talk about broad generalities. We don't need expressions of concern. We need real, hard, concrete plans of action. Number one, I think it was a mistake not to pursue an investigation by the Department of Insurance under the Connecticut Unfair Insurance Practices Act. It's also known as CWIPA. And I think that we ought to pursue an investigation and potentially a lawsuit under CWIPA. Number two, I think we've got to look again at the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act, CUTPA, which is governed by the Department of Consumer Protection. They've done an investigation. I don't know if they've gone far enough. Under both investigations, we need to focus on the language change that took people out of coverage and changed the definition of the perils of collapse. I would do those two things right away as Attorney General, and I think I understand that those are two areas where we can focus because of my experience as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And then, moving on, it's really important to occupy that legislative role, to use the bully pulpit of the Attorney General's office to push the legislature to do more. Already, we've created a Healthy Homes Fund. We've created a captive insurance company. I helped to raise a bill in the Judiciary Committee this year to do even more. We have $12 going from every homeowner's insurance policy into the Healthy Homes Fund. It's a drop in the bucket, but I think it's extraordinarily important. What is really troubling to me is that we've put $20 million in this year under this governor and this legislature. Next year, if we have a Republican governor, that Republican governor will have to approve the $20 million again. And Bob Stefanowski has already said he won't do that. He sees no role in government.
From Eastern Connecticut, how do you address Crumbling Foundations, Ms. Hatfield?
Yes, thank you. So first off, I believe that there should have been an investigation as to who knew what when. So I will start an investigation, a comprehensive investigation. It never should have taken 540 complaints, over 540 complaints, to finally get the ear of Hartford. Also, last week, nearly $800 million, not a dollar, to Crumbling Foundations, not a dollar, but yet there was money for playscapes, for grocery stores, for splash pads, for private businesses where Dan Malloy and William Tong come from. Millions of dollars went down to Stanford to private businesses. Not a dollar went to the Crumbling Foundations and the people of Eastern Connecticut. I also believe that we need an Attorney General that can work across the aisle, that can work with Democrats and Republicans, that can reach down to the administration in D.C. and work with them to get appropriate resources for the people of Eastern Connecticut. I plan to work with Congressman Courtney on the other side of the aisle and other individuals, regardless of their party. I do not believe William Tong can do that.
Let me follow up with you, and you'll get a similar follow-up from Senator Tong. The insurance industry is one of the single most important employers in the state of Connecticut. Employs tens of thousands of people. Some of the biggest names in the entire industry are still based here. Would you want to depose some of those executives, bring them into an investigation to find out what did they know when, and talking about that investigation you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Everything starts with communication. I've been in contact with people in the insurance industry, and I plan to sit down with folks from the insurance industry to see what they knew as well. If it takes a subpoena, it takes a subpoena, but I believe that the people of Eastern Connecticut need answers, and they should have been listened to back when Attorney General Blumenthal was in office.
Representative Tong, same question to you. Would you want to depose
Yes, plain and simple, clear as day. And I've been specific about what I would do, not just some nebulous investigation, but investigation under the Connecticut Unfair Insurance Practices Act and the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. You know, Ms. Hatfield has made reference to this bond commission meeting that she attended. As far as I can tell, it was the first bond commission meeting Ms. Hatfield had ever attended in the middle of a campaign. And I wonder if she opposes all of the bonding, millions and millions of dollars for Eastern Connecticut, millions of dollars to dredge the harbor in New London, millions of dollars for schools in Eastern Connecticut, millions of dollars for GAs and criminal courthouses in Danielson and in New London, millions of dollars for the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. That's critical bonding for the people of the state. And to mock the bond commission when it's making those critical investments in her hometowns in Eastern Connecticut just doesn't make any sense to me. Let me say something about the splash pads. It's easy to stand on the sidelines and mock splash pads in New Haven, but it's because I think Ms. Hatfield has not been to New Haven, doesn't know the people of New Haven, that she feels privileged to mock them. Those splash pads are for kids so that they have something to do in the summertime and they don't get into trouble.
Final word on this topic, Ms. Hatfield, if you'd like to respond.
Yes, I think it's the issue of the matter of priorities is 300 bridges. 3 of those bridges structurally deficient over bodies of water. So it's really putting items in priority. Those bridges that are going over bodies of water where you're traveling with your family, I'm traveling with mine, that's a priority. I worked at Yale New Haven Hospital in the mental health ward. I know New Haven. I've prosecuted cases in New Haven. I know New Haven. I lost a first cousin who was homeless in New Haven. So I believe William Tong and I should sit down and have a cup of coffee to see what he really knows about Sue Hatfield before making broad comments.
I think that'll be our last comment on that topic. We're going to go to a couple one-minute topics per response, if that's all right. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. Ms. Hatfield, what do you make of what the Malloy administration has done when it comes to criminal justice reform, and is that something that you would want to pursue?
I believe that Malloy and Representative Tong's initiatives with criminal justice is outrageous. The first 75 days of the early release program, there has been numerous children sexually assaulted. There have been murders, a triple murder in my hometown of Griswold, where a family will never be the same. I've spent my career prosecuting and putting criminals in jail, and Mr. Tong has been releasing those prisoners early. These individuals out in the community, innocent people, don't have a second chance. In Connecticut, the criminal justice system, many people are given a second chance. There's many diversionary programs to become incarcerated in Connecticut and then have a recommendation that this person is at risk of harming somebody if released, and that person is still released and goes on to commit heinous crimes. We need to change that.
Representative Tong, 1 minute to you.
These fear tactics are right out of Donald Trump's playbook. Let me tell you the facts about criminal justice reform. We're one of the safest states in the nation. We have the second highest drop in violent crime. We've dropped our prison population from 21,000 at the height of the Roland Rail years to 14,500 now, saving taxpayers in this state hundreds of millions of dollars. Ms. Hatfield asked who was more qualified to reach across the aisle and pass major legislation. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Second Chance Society law and the bail reform law, both of which I had a major role in writing and passing, were bipartisan bills. The laws that she's criticizing, and by the way, those two laws, the Second Chance Society law, the bail reform law, were brokered by me with two important people, the Republican leader of the Senate, Len Fasano, and the Republican leader of the House, Demis Claridis, both of whom voted for it.
I'll give you each 30 seconds on this. Representative Tong first.
Sure.
Do you think Connecticut's a safer place than 10 years ago?
Yes, it absolutely is, and the data shows it. As I said, we have the second highest drop across the country in violent crime, and I think crime in Connecticut is at it's either a 50 or a 75-year low. The numbers are so high that sometimes I forget whether it's 50 or 75, but it is extraordinarily low. And for Ms. Hatfield to come in here and say that we're responsible for these tragedies is just unconscionable. Ms.
Hatfield?
I don't know what numbers Mr. Tong is looking at, but I'm looking at what happened in my hometown of Griswold in the Lindquist family. People in Connecticut are outraged by the early release program, not just Republicans, but Democrats alike. The law enforcement community who risk their lives on a daily basis, and then these dangerous criminals are released into the public is outrageous. People are outraged.
1 minute to you. Next question, Representative Tong. Should Connecticut be pursuing, regulating, and legalizing the recreational use of marijuana in the state?
You know, this is up to the legislature to decide. And as Attorney General, it will be one of our jobs to defend whatever decision the legislature makes. I've been one of the architects of the medical marijuana program, and I think we've done a really good job with that. It's seen as one of the tightest programs in the country, and we help people with debilitating diseases. You know, the question of recreational marijuana is a difficult one. I struggle with it. I'll tell you one thing. I don't think we should do it just for the money. I think we should have a conversation about the policy and have a principled discussion about facts and figures and the experience in Colorado, soon to be Massachusetts, and elsewhere. But if the legislature makes that decision, it'll be my job to defend it.
Do you think you would have voted yes on it had it come up in the General Assembly?
You know, I actually am one of the legislators responsible for raising the bills around recreational
That's why I'm
marijuana.
asking.
Yeah, and we couldn't get the votes.
Were you one of the yeses or the nos?
I tried to write a law that we could vote for, and I wasn't successful.
So you're trying to get to yes.
We were trying.
Ms. Hatfield?
I'm against legalizing marijuana, point blank. I believe it sends the wrong message to our young people, especially when we are having the opioid crisis and the overdose. I think it sends the wrong message, especially when there is also discussion about taxing and raising revenue for the state based upon the sale of marijuana. So no, I am not for legalizing. If, however, it is the law of the land, I will defend it as the Attorney General. My job is to enforce the law.
Next question on sports wagering in the state of Connecticut. Ms. Hatfield, do you think that that's something the state could pursue? And how do you imagine that impacting the state's compacts, which, of course, are with the tribes in your neck of the woods?
Mm-hmm. So with sports wagering, I believe that we really need to take a close look at it. We need to also preserve the compacts with the tribes out in eastern Connecticut. So it's really a balance. I need to, as the next Attorney General, look into this issue more. It's a balance between opening the door to sports wagering, but also protecting the compact with the tribes.
Representative Tong?
I think Ms. Hatfield would agree. We only have one Attorney General at a time, and this is a live issue, and it's important that neither of us prejudice or bias the discussion of that issue before either of us has the honor of being Attorney General, because it's very likely that one of us will get a request for an advisory opinion. Let me just say generally, in broad terms, that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that this is something that Connecticut can pursue. From an economic perspective, we never want to be behind others. We want to make sure that we're being on the forefront of potentially revenue-generating activities. But I agree, the jobs in Eastern Connecticut are extraordinarily important, as are jobs in Bridgeport and New Haven. And as we move forward, the Attorney General will play a really important role in bringing parties together and finding a gaming future for Connecticut that makes sense for us and our families.
And quickly, if it's all right, because she did mention specifically the compacts. Do you imagine the gaming framework being adjacent to or intertwined with the gaming compacts?
Again, that's a very specific question. Yeah. As you know, the tribe suffered a setback in federal court just yesterday, 2 days ago. Yeah. And I think, again, it's Attorney General Jepsen said that decision was disappointing. I think it's extraordinarily important to honor and respect those relationships with the tribes.
And we've reached the near conclusion of our debate. Ms. Hatfield, your closing statement.
Thank you. So it's been a pleasure to be here today with you, William, as well as thank you very much, Max, for the opportunity to speak with the voters. I also thank NBC Connecticut. The choice is clear. With who will be the next Attorney General, I believe that I am the best choice to be Attorney General. I will follow the law. I will leave politics at the courthouse steps, much the same way Attorney General Jepsen has done. He's done an excellent job at that, and that's what I will do as the next Attorney General. I have experience in state court as a prosecutor, prosecuting crimes, keeping the laws in our neighborhood safe, and I will be the next Attorney General who will follow the law and not let politics be my guide. I will not be lockstep with any party, such as Mr. Tong has been, where he has followed Governor Malloy's bad policies, raising taxes, releasing criminals from jails. So I look forward to the voter support in November.
Representative Tong, final word to you.
The choice is clear, and it could not be more stark. As I mentioned, Sue Hatfield said that she supported the president's policy of separating children from their families. This discussion about Donald Trump is not just about national issues. It's entirely about Connecticut, about Donald Trump's attack on our health care, on immigrants, on our urban communities, on Connecticut taxpayers, on women. And when I think about that policy at the border, and I see Donald Trump tearing kids away from their parents, I wonder what I would do if Donald Trump took my kids away from me. I would do everything I can to stop him. And as your Attorney General, that's exactly what I'll do. Thank you. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
All right, first of all, thank you very much to our candidates, Representative Tong and Ms. Hatfield. And that is all for our Decision 2018 Attorney General debate. We already thanked our candidates for joining us tonight. And thank you for tuning in. And be sure to tune in to NBC Connecticut for all your Decision 2018 coverage. I'm Max Reese, NBC Connecticut. Good night.